Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight, and sometimes more often, to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. My guest today is Danny Sigelman, artist, DJ, drummer, author, radio host, producer, drum instructor. Danny's work with photographer Daniel Corrigan on the book Heyday, 35 Years of Music in Minneapolis is a look back at more than 3 decades of music in Minneapolis through the lens of one of the most prolific and renowned photographers on the scene. So I'm looking forward to talking to Danny about that. Danny's also written for the City Pages, Star Tribune, and Vitamin, worked for KFAI, NPR, Secret Stash Records, and the way we know each other is through my wife's time at the Electric Fetus Records in downtown Minneapolis. Danny, it's great to have you on.
Oh, great to be here. You know, those were really the days at the Electric Fetus. Is that how you guys met?
That's how we met. How we met. I walked in for some jungle and drum and bass and walked out with an email address.
Oh, there you go. No, those were really great times. And I think of it as kind of the golden age of the CD during those times, because people were still buying CDs like mass quantities, you know.
Yeah.
You know? And it's funny to think about now because it's definitely a different animal in terms of like the music business and the scene. But I mean, that was such an amazing time because we were definitely considered one of the cooler places in the Midwest in terms of like music and where stuff would break. I mean, in our store and gain traction elsewhere. And so we were really catered to by the industry. Anything we wanted, I'm sure you've heard stories.
I've heard many stories, yes.
I mean, in term, you know, the joke was we are promosexuals because we would get everything we wanted music-wise for free. I mean, it's really not. It's not the type of job you do to make a living. It's more about the money you don't have to spend on what you're passionate about, which is music and going to see and hear so much music. So that was a really fun time. I don't know that people are catered to the way we were back then with all the freebies.
Yeah, I remember Susie used to have promos up to wazoo that she would bring home, and not just that, but access to all the local shows. Like you wanted to get on the guest list at First Avenue because there was some show you forgot to buy tickets to. Like, yeah, that was easy. It was easy stuff.
Yeah, it was really fun, and I mean, I was just talking about this the other day with somebody. I mean, this is during the time that, you know, the Targets and the Best Buys were really trying to gain traction with music and trying to wipe out all the independent stores essentially. And I mean, you know, you could get really into that story. It's really what kind of I feel made a better case for downloading because the labels were just dropping so much money on these sort of big box retailers. And then we were kind of like the little pilot fish that would actually take advantage of the cool stuff. And the labels really respected us for that because we actually cared about the music. I remember seeing the band Coldplay playing at First Avenue. This was the first time they ever played in the Twin Cities, to give you an idea of when this happened. But they were playing at First Avenue. We were wined and dined by the record label. Here's our new band. You've heard all about them. You know, this is what an amazing opportunity to see them in this context. And I was standing next to the person that, you know, was the music buyer for like Best Buy. And I turned to her and I said, "Oh man, you must be so excited. Isn't this cool?" And she just kind of like eye rolled and was like, "Yeah, I guess," you know. And then out comes Coldplay, and it's almost like she couldn't even be bothered with the music. I'm talking about Coldplay. Like, I'm not even that excited now about them, but like at the time, it was like there was a lot of energy, and it kind of felt like the industry was really kind of catering to the people that just didn't have the passion necessarily to realize that they were in a really amazing position to see a band like that at the time. So it was all really topsy-turvy and upside down, and I took full advantage of it any way I could, really. And that was a really fun era. I feel like it was the last bastion of music retail the way it had been for so long. And I mean, I remember when Napster came around and all these same label people were freaking out. Well, we were like, well, why have you been shoveling so much money towards the big box stores now that the music is up? You know, I remember thinking, why have they been fostering this sort of trend so much now that people don't have to pay for it at all? The rug's really being pulled out from under them, and they didn't really know what to do. And so, you know, realizing that, it really kind of opened our eyes into, you know, the way probably things are now.
Yeah, it's been 20 years when you think about it. I mean, you're talking about the late 90s, 1999 through 2002, through 2005, when CDs were just being sold by the hundreds of thousands from all these stores and scaling through the big box stores. Yeah. And then, you know, Apple creates that iPod and 1,000 songs in your pocket all of a sudden, and like, that's a big threat. You're Danny Sigelman. You love music. I love music. You've made yourself a career out of music, doing all kinds of things in the music industry, and that's what I want to try to get to. Sure. Before we get to that, I just want to say, wow, things have really changed in the music industry in the last 20 years compared to the Electric Fetus is now, you know, gone through this. No, CDs are not as popular as they were. They kind of went out, but now vinyl's back, and back big time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think vinyl is, the way I kind of think of it is like, you know, people collect antique chairs, and you might spend a lot of money on a really nice antique chair when you could really just buy a really cheap brand new one. I kind of feel like the music connoisseur tends to kind of like the old vintage style of listening to music and are willing to invest in that because, you know, something smaller in plastic or something that doesn't even exist doesn't really satisfy that urge.
No.
I can't say that vinyl, I could probably guess that vinyl hasn't like filled the gap that the lack of CD sales. The boutiques, like, you know, the kind of boutique stores like Electric Fetus are able to serve that type of, you know, listener. I don't know that necessarily will sustain so many stores the way it had for so long, but now you're noticing that the chains don't really have a piece of that because they're not going to be able to sell the numbers on something the way they maybe would need to. I mean, I've gone to Target and I've seen they have like 5 records for sale, and that's really about it, you know. And whereas before they were really fighting tooth and nail for that. The indie stores, and of which there are a lot in the Twin Cities, have kind of muscled through it. And so you go to a shop like Roadrunner Records, where I actually also used to work at one point in time. You know, you can sell a really cool old vintage record that might not have had that many pressings of for a lot of money, just like you could a vintage chair, mid-century modern design and that kind of thing. So it's interesting. I don't think there's one way to do anything, and I think that's kind of the beauty of it. I hope that ultimately the artists sort of benefit, and it's really kind of given the power back to the artist to generate what they do and how they present themselves, because there isn't that ability to do it through, you know, a label like maybe there used to be.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't necessarily know what anything is anymore. So
yeah, I totally agree with you.
I mean, I saw who won the Grammys, and I maybe knew who like 2 of them were. So I don't know. I mean, I think people's listening habits as they get into music is probably really different than how it was when I was a kid, and you know that's okay. I'm not the type of person to really kind of like judge what people listen to and what they like and how they get to it. I just hope people find it and enjoy themselves as much as I always have through the years. Yeah. I mean, I got into music at a very, very, like literally like as a newborn. My dad was in radio when I was growing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you about is like, I know you studied at the U of M, but when Where did you get into music? Like, what are your earliest memories of music?
Well, we can go really far back. I mean, before I was at the Electric Fetus, I worked at the university and helped start the student station Radio K.
Oh, really?
That was my outlet. That was kind of my education. I was an art major in college, and I still make art, and I still consider myself an artist, but having the opportunity to volunteer at the radio station and make so many connections with people in bands and art and labels, and putting together a show every day and putting on concerts and promoting shows for the venues in town. I mean, that was truly my education, and that really stemmed out of what I learned as a child. When my dad was in radio. I came up. I was originally born in Minnesota, but we moved around the country a little bit. As much as he was involved in radio, he wasn't necessarily a DJ, but I was surrounded by that from a very young age, and I would say that I got used to getting free records at a very young age.
So the Electric Fetus was a natural extension of
absolutely, yeah. I mean,
of all of that.
I mean, I did so much around town at the time. I was playing in 2 bands when I was in college, and eventually somebody, when I did graduate, right away somebody said, "Oh, there's a perfect job for you at the Electric Fetus." And what I was doing at the Electric Fetus was actually working in the One Stop. So I worked in music distribution. So what we were doing, and it was a long tradition at the Fetus of warehousing the music and then selling it wholesale to other stores in the area. And that gave them a better relationship with the major labels, which is why the labels really loved us, because we would be able to sell the 1 or 2 copies of a new release to the mom and pop shop up in, wherever, New Ulm, or, like the Hibbing, the small towns.
Hibbing or whatever.
They wouldn't be able to buy direct from the label because they would maybe only need a couple copies at a time. And so that, again, that's really how we would help these labels kind of break stuff. So, we were doing a lot of work for them. I mean, I'd send posters, and I'd send all their stuff with the orders that they were making through the One Stop. And then at the same time, as it became easier for bands and artists to make their own CDs, we would also sell the local music to all the stores outstate, but also in town. So you had like your Applause or Cheapo. Even Best Buy was buying the consignment stuff that we were selling. And so in that regard, we were kind of a distributor for all the local bands in town. And as certain local bands, one of them at the time were the Rhymesayers record label. Before
you may have heard of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they as their popularity started to increase, we were one of the only distributors that had their stuff. So I was actually selling a lot of the local music to the chains that we were competing against, but also helping helping the musicians in town get their records in some of those stores in some of those towns where all they had was a Best Buy for a music store. So I mean, that was super cool, and I mean, it was just really fun and rewarding. I mean, I was just getting it from all directions, and I think what I learned as a child and being in radio and is sort of the joy in being able to share music with people, but also kind of help musicians and artists along the way.
You were at the Electric Fetus for quite a while, for about 4 or 5 years, and then you moved on and became a DJ at the Current.
Yeah,
what was that like?
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, it was really interesting at the time. I mean, this was at the very beginning of when it started, Minnesota Public Radio. I don't even remember the year offhand.
2006, maybe 2005, something like that. I remember it being that like 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think they did just celebrate their 15th. I mean, at the time, I was an overnight sub. I kind of got a real rude awakening in terms of how, kind of competitive the radio business is a little bit. Mm-hmm. To be honest, it hadn't really taken off when I was there, so there was a lot of sort of anxiety about what to do and how to make it sound. Being the overnight DJ and working part-time, it didn't really allow me to kind of like, I mean, whenever I was working, I was the only one in the building sometimes, you know? And so I don't feel like I really got recognized, or, you know, I wasn't necessarily a part of the machine in what I thought would be the best way to go about what we were doing. And there was kind of a lot of back and forth, and eventually, as kind of the honeymoon ended for the radio station, they really kind of tightened the reins, and I found myself having, you know, a show that I'd kind of helped build that in terms of like the weekend overnights start to be programmed for me, and I'd be up all night listening to music I didn't necessarily feel was, you know, I had to take direction, and not that I can't handle taking direction, but if nobody's really listening to my input and I'm the one having to go through it,
what's the point?
Yeah, I didn't really enjoy it at a certain point, and I started recognizing how competitive a lot of the personalities were. And to be honest, it sounds kind of presumptuous, or it sounds a little. It might sound a little snotty, but I kind of thought I was a better DJ than some of the people that were full timers. So, you know, having to wait for somebody else to get sick, or, you know, to really be able to be on during the day and shine and make a case for myself, I just didn't see those opportunities. And as soon as my shift started getting programmed for me, I'm just like, well, why am I staying overnight here? I mean, I still had to work day jobs the next day sometimes. It just didn't really work for me, and I can't say it was very sanctimonious when I left. But ultimately, you know, something came along where I was asked to be a pop music DJ in Beijing, China, in 2009. So, yeah,
China, like that's a pretty big step from, you know, St. Paul and working for the Current. Now all of a sudden you're in Beijing, and do you speak Mandarin?
Well, you know, Beijing isn't as wild as downtown St. Paul is. I can speak. I can speak some Mandarin. Yeah, it's a pretty wild story. This was due to a connection at Minnesota Public Radio. The DJ Mindy Ratner is a classical music DJ. I believe she's one of the first women to be hired at NPR. And she had done a similar job in Beijing years before as a classical music DJ. And the idea is that the Chinese government's trying to open up to the world and hiring Westerners to come over and sort of like be kind of be ambassadors for the culture, and she called me one day. This was a few months after I'd left the Current, and she said, you know, you remember how I used to talk about China all the time, and you know, they asked me if I knew anybody, and I thought of you. Would you be interested in doing this? And I was kind of like speechless, and I remember I typed up my resume, and I kind of, you know, made a nice cover letter, and I sent it over there, and like literally about 20 minutes later, they were like, "Okay, you got the job." But that was before I realized, when I got over there, kind of how low the bar really was. So, you know, I take it with a grain of salt. I mean, it was a very weird experience. They really tout themselves as the BBC of China, but I don't think anybody there actually knows what the BBC is. So,
really?
I mean, I worked for the Chinese government. I worked for the all my bosses were Communist Party bosses. You know, I had very weird situations where I was given a lot of power by people who have more power than you could imagine, and I got away with quite a bit, actually. So, in terms of being an artist, I'm always thinking about my own creative expression, and this was just the penultimate opportunity for me to kind of become a character, but also to kind of, you know, fuck with people without them realizing it.
So you get there. Get there, and like, how do you find an apartment? Where do you live? Is that all prearranged? Like, what does that commute look like?
Well, it was scary. I mean, this was a long time ago, before smartphones and everything, and I got there and they put me through this rigorous like medical examination, which was super. Yeah, it was super weird. I mean, I got there and we drove like 45 minutes out of town to this hospital, and like they put all the. I can't imagine what it's like now, but yeah, I mean that was part of it. But then I eventually, they have people that are kind of your chaperones, if you will, and they helped me get a phone, and they helped me deal with the lease that I was going to sign. I mean, they provided me a place to live, but I still had to sign a lease and pay rent. But being able to kind of walk me through that was helpful, and I worked maybe 50 feet from where I was living. It was kind of a little hotel that they had for all the foreigners. The company China Radio International, who I was working for, they hire people from like something like 30 to 40 different countries to do programming in their own languages. And the idea is that this programming gets on the air in China, but also gets distributed somehow around the world. So this is somebody who might speak Farsi, having their program broadcast from China in Iran or in Australia. So there was an English-speaking department that I worked for that had Canadians and Australians and English and South Africans. Yeah, I mean it was wild at first. It was definitely like I had to take a giant leap. Once I found my footing there, I realized the cultural differences and the things that I can kind of push a little bit and still get away with, but also kind of be really mindful to people's lives and the way they operate and their responsibilities. But I mean, there's so many quirky aspects to Chinese culture that when I imagined being there, I thought there would be the Mao Zedong guy behind me with a cane hitting me whenever I played a weird record. But it wasn't like my first interaction with my boss, who I was just petrified by. She had a bunch of us out for dinner, and this was like maybe a month after I'd been there. And I was sitting next to her, and I asked her, what do you think? How's things been going? Have you enjoyed the show we've been doing? And da-da-da-da-da. And this is the woman that's in charge of the English department. And she said, well, I don't know. I never listened to your show.
Oh my gosh.
And she said, nobody's ever said anything, so I guess you're doing a great job. I was just like, yeah.
Wow. How long was the show? And what did you play music?
Yeah, we played music. I did bring a hard drive over, and I kind of uploaded a bunch of files of cool stuff that I wanted to play. And I had a co-host who was Chinese, Lucy, and she was a great friend. And the whole premise of the show was kind of more about the English language for people to listen to, because my show was actually broadcast in Beijing. It was kind of there to provide people the ability to hear programming in English to potentially be able to speak English better if they were studying. So I think a lot of the Chinese I know that a lot of taxi drivers listen to our radio station religiously, because they're really wanting to be able to communicate with English speakers that they might be driving around. And there was a handful of times I would be in the cab and our radio program would be on the air, and one of my friends would tell the cab driver, like, that's the guy on the radio, and they'd kind of turn around and they'd hear my voice and they just didn't understand how that could even happen.
That's awesome. And you were there for about a year? And was it like a fixed contract and then you were coming home, or?
Yeah, it was a year contract, and it was the type of thing, like, I still had an apartment here, and I had my girlfriend here, and my family, it happened so quickly that I ended up going over there. I didn't necessarily see myself staying longer than a year, although I definitely could have. I mean, they did appreciate me. So, I mean, but everything outside of the radio station too was an adventure, and that was an experience I never thought I would ever have. Playing music in Beijing and playing in free jazz bands, and kind of putting together shows over there. And I even had people sending me boxes of records that I would kind of sell whenever I'd go out and DJ or whatever. And The whole thing was a trip. I can say that my biggest my proudest moment was playing on my last show. I played the Replacements' "Fuck School" on the air over there. So.
That's great. That's so great.
They didn't stop me at the airport, so I figured I got away with it.
Were you a drummer back then as well? Were you?
Yeah, I did play drums over there quite a bit. I mean, what was really cool about Beijing and probably a lot of the bigger cities, a lot of people don't necessarily drive, and going to clubs or bars, they have like all of their backline there. So like as a drummer, you know that there's going to be a drum set on stage at almost all these clubs, and you're kind of able to kind of join people, sit in, or put together shows. So a band that I had there, we would just kind of show up and play. That to me was worth the trip. Outside of just the job experience, I didn't. At a certain point, I really didn't take the job experience too seriously because I could kind of tell nobody else did.
Do you have any pictures and videos and photos of your time there?
Yeah, I do. I have a YouTube channel, which is just my name, Danny Sigelman, and I think I have a playlist on there of all the videos I made in China. And that was another part of it, was that my job was so easy. I kind of taught myself how to edit video while I was on the air, while I was working. I mean, the real reality is that we were kind of like window dressing for them to feel like they were doing something, opening up to the rest of the world. They make things seem bigger and more important than they actually are, and behind it's very much like the Wizard of Oz. Everything you see on TV from China, it isn't necessarily the majesty that you imagine it is. And so realizing that I'm kind of just here to be a white guy. I mean, I had somebody, when I started there, I got really angry about something. It's like, how can you guys, why don't you let me say blah, 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 blah. And this woman, she was Brazilian. She said to me, Danny, your job here is to be the white guy. and it really made sense. I mean, that's not to say my work wasn't appreciated, but a lot of times people kind of come and go there, and it's just up to the staff there to kind of keep it all going. And her point was to just enjoy the ride. You're not going to like change everything the way you think it really should be. And I mean, there was a woman that was like a former BBC announcer that got there, and she was all professional and ready to go, and she was just like flabbergasted about the kind of lack of professionalism that was going on there. So in a weird way, it was kind of like a huge community radio station funded by the Communist Party.
So weird and so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I could write I feel like there's so many stories between myself and all the other people that I was working with that a really good book about the media climate in China could be really interesting.
And you've written a book, and it's a book that's actually received a fair amount of critical acclaim here. It's called Heyday, 35 Years of Music in Minneapolis. And you wrote it with Daniel Corrigan, who basically is the guy who takes pictures of music bands, the legendary music bands in the Twin Cities, and has so for decades now. Tell me about the origin story of your involvement with this book, Heyday.
I called him the original Instagrammer. He was taking photos of music, very often being the only person in the venue at the time with the ability to do so with his camera. I think our stories parallel quite a bit. One of our mantras in terms of being in the scene and doing this kind of work is that you always want to look like you're supposed to be somewhere. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten, better seats or just kind of walked into a club or whatever by just kind of making it appear that this is what I do. And I mean, it's almost like that kind of you manifest your own destiny in a lot of ways. And so with Dan, I've always loved what he did. I think Dan's most well known for some of the album covers he did in the 80s, the Replacements, the Soul Asylum. Husker Du used him for quite a bit. Dan was at a time and place when the Minneapolis music scene was really hopping, and being kind of on the front lines like he was able to capture quite a bit, and worked as a photographer professionally for many years. And knowing what he had in his archive of photos, I had this idea, I think he'd attempted to do something similar. So I was at this event where Dan was showing off his photos, and I met this guy, Josh, who works for the Minnesota Historical Society Press. And Josh said, yeah, I just love Dan's stuff. I've always loved what he does. He's very well known. I've thought it would be so cool to do a book with this guy, but I haven't gotten much response from him. I don't know if he doesn't use email or, check. You have to kind of help me. And I said, Josh, I'm your man. I've had this idea for a long time as well. I'm friends with Dan, and I think it might be a little bit of a level of trust thing. And with us kind of working and nudging him, I think he'll give us the access. And being a writer, once I came back from China, I really started covering music as a writer. I used my skills of interviewing as a writer, but also as a DJ to kind of get Dan out of really get him going and telling the stories that I wanted for all these photographs that we were finding. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible how much stuff he has, and eventually the book came out, and it was no surprise. It was really well received. I feel like it was kind of the beginning of a lot of music books that have come out of the Twin Cities, especially from the Minnesota Historical Society Press, and it's been really cool. It was something I always thought would be well received, and it really was. And I feel like it kind of gave Dan a little bit of a notoriety that was maybe a little overdue. But to say that his images from that time are synonymous with the Twin Cities is an obvious thing that could fill up. We could do more volumes. But it was great, and it was hard to get him out of his shell initially, but then I think it was very rewarding to see him, to get the praise that maybe people hadn't really known whose pictures those were all this time, and to have it in the book was great.
Yeah. And I read somewhere that there were tens of thousands of images and slides, some that he hadn't even seen, that I believe Josh went through to identify the ones that were potentials.
That became my job just as much as the writing, was to go through all this stuff, and a lot of it were on negatives. To find like the outtakes of the Replacements' "Let It Be" album cover was really fun for me as a fan. But then to also realize like, this is all the work that went into the image that we know, makes it super fun, and also gives Dan a little bit of an opportunity to describe the process of how it came to be, especially considering that wasn't his first choice. Yeah, there's thousands and thousands of pictures. And then, of course, when we were all done, he's like, "Oh, I found another box of pictures." It's like, come on, man. Where? Who knows? I would love to say that maybe someday there'll be another edition of that, or a sequel to Heyday.
That'd be great. Do you have a favorite photo?
Well, there is a picture of from that Let It Be session that's a little more straight on from across the street, and the Stinsons had a dog that was out on the rooftop, and Bobby's pretending like he's about to kick the dog off the roof. It's kind of a evil shot, but it's just knowing the band and their sense of humor. Is definitely kind of one of my favorite pictures.
That's the Replacements, right? Just to be clear, that's they were on the roof. That's the album cover.
Yeah, the Replacements, Let It Be. There's another great photo from the Walker Art Center of David Byrne. That's like a profile shot. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but there was so many great concert photos, and then the ones that I'd never seen before, I guess, really stuck out. There's a picture of the Clash playing at Roy Wilkins Auditorium, or was it the St. Paul Civic Center? Maybe. It's crazy because I have. I think it really plays into what I love to do is to kind of unearth the ephemera of music and the music culture, and that's something I feel I do with DJing and bringing music over to China like that and kind of putting it in a different context. Heyday really was really solidified my passion for that type of stuff. Kind of finding those little nuggets. It's just like digging for records when you're going through bins and trying to find the one thing that sparks your interest and turns out to be really cool. To me, it's very synonymous with kind of like the project like that. There was another book I worked on. I'm not the author of, but I discovered this guy named Alan Bolio, and we did a book with him at the Historical Society called Before the Rain, and it's a book of Prince photos, and it was the same type of thing. I met this guy, and he'd been sitting for years on all these really amazing Prince photos, and I told him I don't need to be the author for this book, but I absolutely, as a fan, I feel it's my duty that other people, fans, need to see this stuff, not just for its historical importance, but just because it's really fun. It's so cool to, see Prince eating a piece of French toast in the morning. I don't know, there's something to be said when you've been so deep in the trenches like this. It's the minutia of the music culture that starts to fascinate me more than the real, more than the obvious, like the obvious hits. And so maybe in a way working at a Minnesota Public Radio where it's a little tighter in terms of like having to cater to a certain style or sound or recognizability, that isn't where my passion is. It's really about kind of finding all the nuggets and the essentially kind of the a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, and eventually I went on to kind of work more in presenting, and so eventually I did kind of move on to kind of being helping like present music a little more and working at the Dakota Jazz Club, and I've also done some booking at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I helped with their First Avenue exhibit, and also the Mill City Museum. And it's what I've been missing most during this quarantine was the not being present in music and in the moment and the audience. That's been really hard.
What has the pandemic done to the music scene in Minneapolis, and what are you doing right now, and how do you see it changing as we start to optimistically see the beginning of normal life at some point this year, I would guess?
Well, I mean, that's really hard to say. I think all of us are going to kind of like jump back in different ways. I see myself hopefully getting back into presenting music, but being a drummer, I've spent the last year really trying to perfect my skills in as a musician myself. So I could see doing that a little more. But how are people going to eventually feel comfortable enough to congregate? I watch videos of huge concerts, like the Foo Fighters playing at Wembley Stadium, and it just gives me the heebie-jeebies,
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. It's like...
Metallica in France or whatever. It's like, whoa! I wonder if people are going to kind of tiptoe into it a little more. I could see musicians and artists really maybe scaling down the necessity to have such high numbers in their audience. Maybe the record or the recorded music aspect has become more of a connection. I mean, Taylor Swift is an obvious example of that, and maybe that's giving the recorded work a little bit more of a cachet. I feel like in the last 5 years, live music has really been the bread and butter, and so has been more of the emphasis. I mean, there was a time the concerts and the tour promoted the record. And then the record started promoting the tour that would happen.
Yeah.
And now it's almost like both are kind of even, because I don't think that like the huge, enormous festivals are really going to kick in until maybe later in the year or early next year. that kind of puts the emphasis on the artist a little bit to really hone their craft and their vision about what they're doing. I think music gets turned into such a numbers game, and having to have that popularity quotient, and there's maybe a little bit more of a level playing field now that the limitations might still be in place for a little while.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I miss going to shows though. I love going downtown with Susie and going to First Ave and seeing a band that I've never heard of come on before, a band that I came to see, and discovering music like that. I'm just worried that those shoulder to shoulder shows at First Ave are not going to be back anytime soon.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's going to take a while, and then even if they do come back, are people going to be willing to go into that? I don't know. I think there's going to be another layer of innovation on the artist's part to connect to the audience that I'm excited about. I don't know what it necessarily will be, but is it a pop-up? Is it a hybrid of like being able to watch a band that's in town, and then are the tickets only going to go to the highest paid bidder? I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
we'll just have to see. I like to think that the possibility for the artist to really do more of what they want is there. It's just more about having the ability to present it either in a venue or online. Hopefully there's going to be a lot of great new music coming out since everybody's been holed up during this time.
Yeah, a year of forced creativity for all the musicians.
Yeah, and there's always been kind of the joke that in Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, the music is so good because people are kind of holed up for so long during the winter, and then the springtime comes about, and everybody's got their new releases. I mean, no, I think there's some truth to that, and now the whole world has kind of experienced that in a way.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to anything particular that's coming up?
Well, man, it's such a bummer. I was really looking forward to my first concert, the Bad Plus. The kind of modern jazz trio have been around for about 20 years, and I used to present them at the Dakota all the time, and I'm a friend of Dave King, the drummer, who's one of the best drummers in the world. They announced a show, and then like 5 days later, it got canceled. So I don't know what's next. But I did see that Hinterland Festival is happening in Iowa in August, and I did see that First Avenue announced Dinosaur Jr. In September.
Really?
In September. And I mean that's a band I've probably seen 100 times, but might be my favorite time ever seen them.
Yeah, that Dinosaur Jr. I think I saw them in Hyde Park or somewhere in London when Susie and I were there. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and were able to see them play live. It was great. It was so great.
Nice. Yeah, so what I really miss, especially in Minneapolis, is the block parties, the kind of small, the bar. Every bar has a block party at some point during the summer, and I realized how much of my network of friends and people that I see continually are through the music scene, and that without that standard in my life, without that habit, that continual habit of going to see music, you really do feel disconnected, and having to make effort to see people that I normally would see all the time was pretty daunting. And those are just like the casual faces in the crowd. You really start to realize that you relied on to kind of bond in that way. I'm looking more forward to that almost than anything, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I can't believe the time has gone so quickly. It's just been great talking to you and talking about the music scene in Minneapolis and your experience with it. And I just am so grateful that you came on the show, and I appreciate all the time you spent with me today. It's just been awesome talking to you, Danny.
Oh, thanks so much. You'll have to say hi to Susie and the gang for me, and promise that once things open up, I get to DJ another party at your house.
You know what? You're the guy that will call when that happens, for sure. It'll be great.
Right on, man.
Right on.
Thanks.
With me today was Danny Sigelman, author, DJ, drummer, freelance journalist, and so much more. You can find him on Twitter as paper_sleeves and on Instagram as papersleeves. You've been listening to the TEN7 Podcast. Find us online at ten7.com/podcast. And if you have a second, do send us a message. We love hearing from you. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thanks for listening.